Okay, so the last bit for this section 8.5.1 pertains to competing instincts. So we're going to talk about the competing instincts, and we've seen so far sort of the competition, if you will, between the political nobility and the oppressed, between the exceptional and privileged and the mediocre, and between the happy and healthy and the discontented and the sick. So let's look at these competing instincts. Alright, so competing instincts. The first is the instinct of the community, right? And I'm actually going to read out of the book in a second. The instinct of the community. The instinct of the community. Attributes value, the instinct of the community is to attribute value to obedience, reciprocity, consideration, moderation, sympathy, right? The instinct of the community is to give credence, right, to value these characteristics: obedience, reciprocity, consideration, moderation, sympathy. And we've heard this before, right? We recognize that this instinct within the community is an unnatural instinct, and that the instinct within the community, the actual instinct, he's sort of using the term instinct, I would argue here loosely, not biologically instinctual, but this instinct has been a product of, as we said before, the creation, the manufacturing, the instillment of Christian values within the community. It's through the community, it's through the system of sort of opting into the Christian moral ethic that we derive an instinct for all of these things: reciprocity, sympathy, moderation, obedience, and so on, right? These as conditions for its survival, right? It's important to recognize that, in a sense, what the genius, the actual, in credit to the Christian moral tradition, the genius of the tradition is that it recognizes that if you're talking about a herd, right, if we're talking about herd mentality and herd behavior, there is power in numbers, right? So that sort of cliche, we've all heard this adage before, there is power, this is not Nietzsche, this is me, but there is power in numbers. Sort of the justification for that is a recognition of the instinct within the community to survive. It's a survival instinct, right? If we've already attained group recognition, and we recognize that we are being assaulted, that we're being threatened, the identity or the actual group is being threatened, as in the case of something as heinous as genocide or something, we recognize that all of these requirements are important among the group, right? So it's an instinctual mode of survival, if you will. And I actually want to read that bit in Nietzsche, if I can find it. Yeah, he says right at the beginning of note 216, when the masters could also become Christians, it lies in the instinct of the community, right? Family, race, herd, tribe, to feel that the conditions and desires to which it owes its survival are valuable in themselves. So what does it owe its survival to? For example, obedience, reciprocity, consideration, moderation, sympathy. Consequently, to suppress everything that contradicts or stands in the way of them. Now, if you think about this, right, we'll use oh my goodness, my brain just went crazy. The antonym, right? We'll use the antonym for sympathy, right? Apathy, indulgence, disobedience, right? So let's look with respect to apathy, right? Being apathetic, not really caring so much about the plight of another, right? If the group, if the other is important to the survival of the group, then I have to care about the other, right? I have to love my neighbor as I love my enemy. I have to love my enemy as I love my neighbor. Why? Both are requisite, required, important, integral aspects of the herd. So you take the herd as a mass, as a unit, right? So I can't really be apathetic to the plight and the suffering of others, because their plight and their suffering is incorporated within the total identity of the group, right? It's not until you get to a point, and it's not easy to do this by any means, but it's not until you get to a point in which you can say, I was of the group, right? Formally, I was of the group, but I've stepped outside of the group, so that I'm, I have affiliation with the group, but I'm not part of the group. We all do this, hopefully, at one point of our life, to separate yourself from the herd. And the way that you do this separation is through excellence, right? I'm an artist. I can paint really well. I'm a good mathematician. I'm a good singer. I do something to separate myself, identify myself from the group. As soon as you do that, however, the haters are going to reign in to be sort of hip hop in my discourse, right? That you're going to get hate, right? They're going to be like, oh, you're prideful. Oh, for me, of course, being a black man, oh, you think you talk white. That's the stuff that we hear. I've heard this my whole life, right? Because you're trying to separate yourself too much from the group, right? You need to conform, right? And I would put conformity. He didn't put that there, but I mean, obviously, conformity is a huge deal. So we got that. This was A. The next point, B. Survival is understood in terms of collective survival. That's a very, very important point, right? When we're talking about sort of group identity, when we're talking about group recognition, when we're talking about herd mentality, survival is contingent on group survival, collective survival. It's not just the survival of the individual. Survival is understood in terms of collective survival. It is a herd survival, which, this is all me, which requires consideration for the collective over and above the individual. Right? So we suppress the needs of the individual in favor for needs of the group. Why? Because there is power in numbers. How does this relate to what Nietzsche already said before? As I said, I don't know, a few hours back, with respect to the discourse on transgression, you can't really make, according to Nietzsche, transgressions against fellow men, fellow women, fellow members of humanity. You can only really make, for Nietzsche, a transgression against God. So if you do me wrong, I'm not justified in sort of my apathy for your plight. I'm not justified in indulging myself in your, sounds sort of sadistic, but indulging myself in my revenge and your pain for having harmed me. I'm not justified in any of that, right? Why? Because the only transgression that counts is the transgression against God. So, as we see in B, it's not about the individual anymore. It's about the group, right? And for me to say, well, no, you've done me wrong, and I'm personally offended by that, and now I have to seek vengeance for that wrongdoing. Oh, well, that is going to compromise the numbers, right? And we can't compromise the numbers. We need to make everybody as sort of this banal, sort of medicated, boring, bland, mediocre, average existence, so that no one sort of excels or rises, everybody stays in their place, and it'll just be a lot of us, right? And just for the fact that there's a lot of us, despite the fact that there isn't any exceptionality, there isn't any excellence in the group, there's just numbers, and you gotta bow to numbers, which is the one true biological fact. Right? And in fairness to the group, though, a quick side note, that is probably the only biological appeal that's made, right? The fact that there's power in numbers. Nietzsche doesn't talk about that at all, but that's sort of an interesting side note. Alright, so that's that. Number 2, the instinct of the ruler. Right? So this is the instinct of the community, and now we're talking about the instinct of the ruler. Right? And the question is, what is the instinct of the ruler? The first thing is, and this is a direct quote from page note 216, rulers patronize and applaud the virtues that make their subjects useful,